To our next item, and luckily with our birthday boy right here. So we move on to Geneva, actually, where Syrian government delegates will meet with the UN envoy today in a push to restart peace negotiations in Geneva, and pressure may be mounting on President Bashar al-Assad to take vital humanitarian steps. Speaking of those 10,000 children missing in Europe, that's a direct result from that war, a lot of it from that war in Syria. The Saudi-backed HNC, who arrived yesterday despite threatening to boycott, is demanding an end to airstrikes and blockades, sieges that have left places like Madaya starving before they sit down at the table. Now, amid the UN-brokered talks, at least 60 people, 60 died in blasts near an important Shia shrine south of Damascus, an attack claimed by the Islamic State. Officials say they were looking to disrupt the talks, but in reality, the talks have not even begun. Let's take a look at the following report, break it down from there.
Representatives of the Syrian opposition are in Geneva, Switzerland, for indirect talks with officials from the regime of President Bashar al-Assad. But it is still unclear if negotiations will actually take place. A representative for the main opposition body said talks would not be held unless a series of goodwill measures are carried out.
We only came to Geneva after we had received assurances and a commitment. We have written commitments, and we have a very precise commitment on the fact that there would be serious progress on the humanitarian issues.
The opposition is seeking a halt to regime attacks on civilian areas, the lifting of blockades, and the release of prisoners.
It's important for us to see that food goes to our children who are starved to death. It is important for us that those women in the jails of Assad are released.
Meanwhile, back in Syria, developments on the ground have complicated matters. At least 60 people were killed Sunday in bomb blasts that struck near Damascus's largest Shiite shrine. Islamic State claimed responsibility. The militant Shiite organization Hezbollah, an ally of the regime, is known to have a large presence in the area.
This explosion is fabricated. It's created to present a misleading image to the world that this explosion was caused by the opposition.
Nothing would do more to cut the legs out from under Daesh than a negotiated political solution in Syria that would allow all sides, all parties, all countries to focus on defeating the terrorist group Daesh once and for all.
It is unclear at this stage how long the Geneva talks will last, if they take place at all.
If they take place at all is the question of the hour. Ali Wakaday, 24 News senior Middle East analyst with me in studio. Where do we stand right now with these talks, and what round is this now, attempted round?
It is the Geneva third, and I think that on the contrary of Geneva 1 and 2, where the opposition had the feeling, and even on the ground, its hand on the upper because the regime was on the defensive, the situation is now exactly the opposite. The regime has the upper hand, especially after the battles of the last weeks.
With a lot of Russian help.
Absolutely, and he is not in a rush to make any concessions to the opposition, because he considers, the regime considers, and it is true, that the team that represents the opposition in Geneva has nothing to do with the ground. We talk about the Free Army, and who has really little things to do with the situation on the ground. It's not Al-Nusra Front, it's not ISIS that are not represented. This is why the regime is trying to point on the opposition and to ask whom are they representing in Syria, and what is their political way. The regime is trying to focus on the style, less on the content. But we should pay attention. If in Geneva 1 and 2 we were talking about the transition period, we were talking about replacing Bashar Assad. We are no more there. We are talking about goodwill measures that should be taken by both the opposition and the regime. But once again, which opposition is represented? And we are talking about a joint fight against the Islamic State, and not, of course, raising the question of Bashar Assad.
Bashar Assad, it's what a far cry from several years ago when there were red lines in the sand to remove Bashar Assad. We have to remember, though, that this conflict, these talks, go directly to the lives of people who are fleeing for their lives. Apropos, 10,000 children, migrant children, mostly from Syria, missing in Europe. That is the thing we need to remember. Let's take a look at the following report.
Migrants continue to face obstacles and threats in their journey to safer havens, and the situation is perhaps much worse than first thought. A new report by the EU's police agency Europol shows that at least 10,000 unaccompanied child refugees have disappeared after arriving in Europe. Many are believed to have fallen into the hands of organized trafficking syndicates. Europol also documented a disturbing crossover between organized crime groups, which help smuggle refugees into the EU, and human trafficking gangs exploiting them for sex work and slavery. In the meantime, the migrants are facing another threat in Europe, xenophobia.
This is a demonstration that attracts groups and individuals who sympathize with or are active in this, what should I say, radical nationalistic landscape.
A gang of masked black-clad men rioted the streets of Stockholm Friday and distributed leaflets threatening to attack migrant street youth in order, quote, to make a statement. This worrying increase in tension between migrants and the local population comes days after a 22-year-old woman was stabbed to death in a center for unaccompanied asylum seekers minors in southwestern Sweden. The protest also comes a few days after Stockholm announced it is preparing to deport up to 80,000 asylum seekers.
I mean, last year we had roughly over 160,000 people applying for asylum in Sweden, which is the highest number ever, and it's also the highest number per capita in the European Union. It will start for real in the beginning of next year, I think, where there will be an increase in the numbers that we have to deport.
Coupled with the long-lasting threats they face when crossing the Mediterranean Sea, it is no wonder that so many migrants are considering the possibility of returning to the war-torn countries.
The important story of the year, so to speak. When we get back, Israeli government makes a landmark decision to allow egalitarian prayer at the Western Wall. But the battle between factions of the Jewish faith is far from over. Stay with us. Now the news.